Hello everyone and welcome to the actual last game we'll be showing from the FIDE Candidates Tournament. I didn't think I was going to show it, but so many of you requested it and it is a fine game. So I thought, alright, let's show it, and we're going to discuss the standings a little bit, but only a little bit because we've discussed it at length in the previous video. And also something you guys requested is to show what happens to the actual ranking, because some players lost rating points, some players gained rating points, who entered the top 10, who dropped out of the top 10. And so on. But we're going to discuss this after the game. You guys will enjoy it. It's Fabiano Caruana versus Alireza Firouzja. Both of them not having the tournament of their lives. So, okay, for Alireza, it's the first candidate that he's playing, most likely not the last, but Fabi, everyone expected him to either win it or, to almost win it, but here he's having a disastrous second half of the tournament. First half of the tournament, he was just crushing everyone. Okay, he didn't win all the games, but he didn't lose any of the games, and he won some of the games. But here, in the second half of the tournament, as it's a double round robin, 0 wins for Fabi, and, well, many losses and many draws. So far, he has 3 draws and 3 losses, and now he has a chance to finish the tournament on a high note. He does have the white pieces in the final round. So let's see what happened here. Fabi has the white pieces, and he opens with e4. Sorry about that. We have e5 by Alireza, knight to f3, knight to c6, and now bishop to b5. The Ruy Lopez is on the board. Knight to f6. We have the Berlin defense, as everyone is playing that, obviously. d3, bishop to c5, and now b captures on c6, or rather, bishop captures on c6, d captures on c6, knight b to d2. We've seen this many times. The knight is coming to c4 to go after the e5 pawn. So, of course, knight to d7 and f6 will be played. We've seen this many times as well. Knight d7 castles, and Alireza castles too. We have knight to c4 now, attacking the e5 pawn, f6 by Alireza, and the king to h1. And here there are some games where a5 was played, but Alireza plays rook to f7, and it is now already, as of move 9, that we have a completely new game. So Fabi goes knight to h4. He wants to put the knight on f5. Also, this opens up the possibility of pushing f4. Bishop to f8, and now knight to f5. We have knight to c5 now, opening up an attack towards the knight, and the queen to h5. Nicely defending this knight. We have bishop to e6, putting pressure on this knight, hoping to capture, and then maybe d captures on c4. But now Fabi just plays b3. And now, of course, if you capture, we're going to capture with the b pawn, and everything is perfectly fine. Queen to d7, developing the queen. Alireza now prepares to bring the rook into the game. Bishop to e3, and now king to h8. We have knight to h4 now, trying to take advantage of this weird square that the king is occupying, to go knight to g6 check maybe, as the h-pawn is pinned, but just king back to g8. We have queen back to e2 by Fabi, and now rook to e8. So Fabi has to figure out a different way of how to reach Alireza's king. We have a4, and now pawn to b6. We have rook to g1, and here, by playing rook to g1, Fabi is saying that he is not of a peaceful mind. He wants to play g4, open up the position, put the knight back on f5, and start some sort of an attack against Alireza's king. We have pawn to a5. Alireza says, all right, you do that, I'm gonna wait. Knight to d2, and now pawn to f5 by Alireza. Now keeping around at the g4 square, but Fabi just captures. We have e captures on f5, bishop captures, knight captures, we have queen captures on f5, and now even bishop captures on c5. Eliminating this knight, bishop captures on c5, and now we have knight to e4, attacking the bishop here and defending that f2 pawn as it was under attack. So bishop to b4, and now we have rook g to f1. So for the moment, not touching that g pawn. We have queen to g6, and now rook a to d1. So Fabi puts all of his pieces on light squares, as Alireza has a dark square bishop. And basically what you have to ask yourself here is Well, who is better? One thing that you can notice is that Alireza has a double c-pawn, so obviously that's good for Fabi. And another thing is Alireza has a bishop for a knight. As the game is on both sides of the board, a bishop should be a little bit better than a knight, but it's not like anything is going to happen or anything is going to be happening on the queen side, so a knight should be a little bit better here. Also, there's no d-pawn or f-pawn to kick away the knight from this beautiful e4 square, so the knight should be better than the bishop here. But Alireza starts the attack. He plays h5, and now Fabi plays g3. G3 is a very interesting move because it's also a target. Alireza can just attack it with h4. Another thing to consider is maybe pawn to f3, and then if Alireza ever pushes the pawn all the way, just capture with g captures on h3 and try and use the open or semi-open g file to attack the black king. But okay, g3 by Fabi, and now we have rook to f8, rookie to f8, just doubling up on the f file. d4 now, challenging this pawn. E captures on d4, rook captures, and now pawn to h4, trying to open up the position here. And Fabi just plays g captures on h4, sort of a playing like an engine, because usually you never want to do this. Even if it wins a pawn, you don't want to open up your king's position like this. But what else is there? You could play something like f4, and then if h captures, maybe put the king on g2, try and use the h file for your own rooks. So this is possible. But the Fabi decides to go for g captures on h4, and now rook to f4 by Alireza. He goes after the h4 pawn. So queen to c4 with check, king to h8, and now knight to g5 by Fabi. Really going for the attack here, but it's hard to accomplish it. We have b5 by Alireza, a very, very tricky move, and here Fabi has to make a choice. Does he want to draw, or does he want to try and push this for a win? Because if he wants a draw, he can play queen to e6, attack the queen here, and the following is basically forced. Queen captures on e6, knight captures, attacks both of the rooks, so you have to play rook captures on f2, threaten to capture on f1, captures, and now we trade everything. A captures on b5, c captures on b5, knight captures on c7, rook captures on c2, and knight captures on b5, and you get this position where Fabi is up a pawn, but it's a doubled h pawn, and you're not gonna be winning this anytime soon. So that's basically one option, and the other one is to try and push this for a win, and that's exactly what Fabi does. Here Fabi plays queen to d3, offers a queen trade, but it's a bit of a different structure than what we've seen here, and it avoids all of the unnecessary trades. However, this leaves Alireza a little bit better, because queen captures on d3, rook captures, and now b captures on a4, b captures on a4, and bishop to d6. And now you can see that this h2 pawn could be a problem. Rook captures on h4, going for the h2 pawn. It's very hard for Fabi to look for winning chances here. But okay, he plays rook to c3, and now rook captures on a4. You'd expect rook captures on h4, but it's actually not that big of a deal, because here you can play f4, block the bishop, and once the pawn is captured, let's say rook f captures on f4, rook captures on f4, rook captures on f4. Now you're just going to play rook captures on c6, and it's not a problem. Rook captures on a4, knight to f7 check, we go after the bishop, king h7, knight captures on d6, c captures, and everything gets traded off. This will be an easy draw. However, rook captures on a4 is a different story, because it keeps all the material, and now Alireza has the passed a pawns that he can start pushing. We have rook captures on c6 by Fabi, rook captures on h4 now, and pawn to f4. And the problem is the position is now winning for Alireza, but it's not all that clear what the easiest way it is. Because here Alireza played a rook h captures on f4. The absolute cleanest way is just bishop captures on f4. Because it doesn't matter what you do, obviously you have to defend the h2 pawn. If you play knight to f3, then we just continue with rook to h6. We offer a rook trade, and now after some move that you can make, for example, knight to e5, a very tricky move, you can't capture because the rook on f8 falls. We're gonna trade rook captures, knight captures, and now we start pushing the pawn. Pawn to a4, let's say knight e5 again with the same idea. King h7, now comes knight to c4, and the game continues with the passed pawn being the passed pawn is unstoppable. King to g6, you're gonna have to play rook to a1, but now we're gonna play rook to a8, and once we put the bishop on this diagonal, that pawn is coming forward. So gonna be winning. And another thing is, instead of knight to f3, you could also play rook f2 to guard the pawn this way, but this is even worse. We're gonna play rook b8, and now we're just gonna go after the white king. This rook is coming to g4, and you're not gonna be able to defend all of this. For example, knight to f3 attacks the rook, rook g4, now rook e2 to stop this, rook to b1 check, rook to e1, and we just trade. Rook captures, knight captures, now we're gonna play bishop to e3, threaten checkmate, and it's very, very ugly. The knight will have to remain here to defend against checkmate. We're going to play bishop to b6. Now everything is defended. We have a nice pass pawn here, and the position is completely winning. But okay, it's move 37. We still need to make 3 more moves to reach time control, and Alireza decided to go for rook h captures on f4. We have rook captures, and now bishop captures on f4. Knight to e4 by Fabi, and now rook to a8. Alireza is ready to start pushing his pass pawn. Rook to c4, and now bishop to e5. Here, if you just start pushing, then you blunder. Knight f3, double attack on the a4 pawn, and also the bishop is hanging. So Alireza has to move the bishop first, bishop to e5, and now rook to a4, Fabi blocking the pass pawn, king to g8, and now king to g2. So from a completely drawn position, Fabi basically went into a position where he has to fight for a draw voluntarily, just for a chance at maybe winning the game. So king to f7, we have knight to d2, and the bishop to c3 now. Attacking the knight, knight e4 attacks the bishop, bishop to b4 controls the knight, also adds more protection to this a5 pawn. King f3, we have king to e6, and now pawn to c3. Chasing the bishop back, bishop to e7. Again, we control the knight very nicely. You all know that the bishop and knight separated by 2 squares cancel each other out, usually. So king to e3, and now pawn to c6. We have h3, bishop to d8, and now knight to c5 with check. We have king to f5, and now knight to b3. So not much happening here. Basically, Alireza is trying to gain activity with his king, trying, well, you can't really push the rook away from the a4 square because it's a light square, and you have a dark square bishop, so you can't move it by force. So you have to try something else. You have to create more weaknesses, but you are up a pawn and you have a very active king, so it should be possible, but definitely not easy. Bishop to b6 with check, king to f3, and now king to e5, and here Fabi plays pawn to h4. We have king to d5, pawn to h5, and now pawn to c5. We have knight back to d2, bishop to c7, and now king to e2. We have rook to h8, going after the h5 pawn. Now comes rook to g4, going after the g7 pawn. Here we have a trade, rook captures, and king to c6, now defending the bishop. And now Alireza is up a pawn, but the position has already completely simplified, and you will not be winning this anytime soon. We have king to d3, bishop to e5, and now rook to f7. And here we have this a4 move, and this is where things get very, very interesting. This is move 59. One more move needs to be made in order to reach second time control, which awards you additional time. You gain an additional 15 minutes on the clock, but also you start getting increment, because there is no increment before hitting move 60. So one more move needs to be made, and Fabi needs to make it a very precise move, something like knight to f3 or knight to b1 or something like that, but definitely not the move Fabi played. Fabi played knight to e4, and this is now a mistake that will cost him the game, but only if Alireza spots why this is so. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find the only winning move for Alireza while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting that this is, yes, one of those puzzles where the winning move starts with a check. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is rook to h3 with check. And now here comes the horror. The point is, if king to c4, which is kind of the square that you want to be, because you know that your opponent has a dark square bishop, the knight guards the c3 pawn. There's no way to kick the king away from this square. I mean, you know you're not losing this. The problem is there's rook h4. What do you do here? The only way to defend the knight here is to play king to d3, and now comes this very nasty c4 check. You cannot capture because you lose the knight with check, and after king to e3, the passed pawn starts marching forward. And look at this, rook to a7, okay, we put a rook behind the passed pawn, rook h3 check, and now you have to defend the pawn, obviously, as it's attacked twice. So king to d2, only move, and now king to d5. We kick away the knight from the defense of the c3 pawn, pawn. Knight to g5 attacks the rook. Rook to h2 check. King to e3. You have to move it somewhere. Doesn't really matter. We're winning the pawn on the next move. So king e3. Bishop captures, and now the problem is you can never capture on a3 because if you capture, then bishop to d2 check will pick up the knight. And without this capture, there is no hope of fighting for a draw. Black is just up 2 pawns, and of course the position is completely winning. So after this rook to h3 check, Fabi says, all right, I'm not going to c4. I'm going to play king to d2, but it doesn't matter where the king goes. The position is winning regardless. King to d5. Just kicks away the knight away from the defense of the c3 pawn. Knight to f2, attacking the rook, and now just rook captures on c3, and now Fabi is just down 2 pawns, and of course the position is completely winning. Rook to f5, Fabi tries one more cheapo before he gives up the game, and here we have rook to g3. Because of course if you start pushing the pawn, then just rook captures with check, and that's it. King captures here, and now you're not winning. Now it's a draw. But Alireza played rook to g3, and he was in this position on move 63 that Fabiano Caruana resigned the game, and he definitely had a terrible second half of the tournament, losing 4 games and drawing 3. I believe that's I mean, for a player of Fabi's caliber, that's unimaginable. And here you resign because you're just down 2 pawns. Let's say knight to d3. It seems like you could win some material here, but just rook captures with check, and there's no defense. King captures a3. You cannot stop the passed pawn because the bishop covers the a1 square, and even if you go after it with the rook, we can just play a2, and whatever you play, a1 queen, rook captures, bishop captures, and there's still the passed c pawn, so of course the position will be winning. So Fabi saw this. After rook to g3, he resigned, and well, not a great second half of the tournament for him, but at least Alireza finishes the tournament on a high note, and as we've already discussed the standings, this means that Alireza finishes ahead of Jan Krzysztof Duda and Richard Rapport. Of course, you've seen this already. We've covered it in the previous video, but in case you haven't, Jan Nepomniachtchi is the winner of the FIDE Candidates Tournament, and he should be challenging Magnus Carlsen for the title. Now, I forgot to mention, the first move for this game was made by the legend himself, former world champion Viswanathan Anand. So there we have it. Let's just enjoy that for a brief moment. Very nice photo. And also here are the as I mentioned, the ranking. These are the top 20 classical players in the world. So Magnus still untouchable with 2864, going for that 2900 rating. Ding also started as a 2800 player. This candidates tournament finishes by winning 2 points, so 2808. That's incredibly impressive, and you can see just how strong Ding is, because you don't just start a tournament with a 2800 rating and finish a tournament with a 2800 rating. You've seen what happened to Alireza in the previous tournament. Then Jan Nepomniachtchi, who almost finished the tournament as a 2800 player, he won 26.4 rating points and finished the tournament as a 2792 player. So really incredible. Alireza lost almost 15 points. Caruana also lost 7.6 points. Nakamura won 7.8 points. So he goes up 3 places. He's currently number 8 in the world. We have Richard Rapport loses 13 points, so he drops 6 places. Rajabov wins 9 points. He goes up 3 places. And Duda loses 10 points, drops 3 places. And that is the 8. Those were the 8 players that have participated in this candidates tournament. So like I said, we've discussed pretty much everything, all the possibilities, what happens next, who challenges who in the previous video. So if you still haven't seen it, do check it out. It will be one of the videos. So yeah, that's the game. Definitely the last game we'll be showing from the FIDE candidates tournament. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I would like to thank Gregory Thomas, Jim Tren, Surya Manikandan, Michael Kalber, and Richard Sanderson for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, checking up on your wonderful suggestions and of course whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.